Set in France, the story begins with the introduction of a Japanese woman named Sayoko and a man named Albert. Although they are new to each other, the two have agreed to meet with a common goal, to avenge the deaths of their children. Their children were victims of illegal practices carried out by a foundation that was involved in the trafficking of young children and the sale of their organs. Their first target is a former staff accountant of the foundation named Laval, who lives in an apartment building. With their ingenuity, Sayoko and Albert get the building password. After that, Sayoko managed to get in and pretended to ask for the address. When Laval came out to assist, Albert quickly sneaked inside and electrocuted him from behind. Sayoko and Albert then took Laval to a long-abandoned building they had prepared in advance. To secure her, Laval was bound with chains. After that, they showed footage showing Princess Albert, who was found dead in an unfortunate condition. Feeling uninvolved in Princess Albert's death, Laval claimed he had long since left the foundation. In fact, according to rumors, the foundation has been disbanded and is no longer in operation. However, because Laval continued to evade and defend himself, Albert became upset and almost shot him. After being calmed down by Sayoko, Albert went to another room to calm down. Just like Albert, who lost his beloved daughter, Sayoko also felt angry and depressed. She threatened Laval that the consequences would be much worse if he refused to cooperate. Since violence didn't work, Albert and Sayoko decided to keep Laval locked up in the building until he couldn't stand it and finally opened his mouth. While Albert is in charge of guarding Laval, Sayoko decides to go home first to work, as her profession as a psychiatrist at a local hospital cannot be abandoned. That night, in the empty building, Laval continues to scream, begging to be allowed to go to the toilet for a while. Albert, whose heart was filled with vengeance and anger, was silent, enjoying the suffering of the one person he considered to be his daughter's killer. Eventually, Laval was forced to relieve himself on the spot, as there was no other option. The following day, when Sayoko arrives, Laval is sprayed with water to keep him healthy and clean until he finally confesses all his deeds. Albert and Sayoko's actions may seem inhumane, but considering their victimized daughter, they felt that this was a fitting punishment for Laval. Afterward, Sayoko cooked and served a meal for them, treating Laval like a slave. I don't know if Laval was the culprit, but this action showed their anger. Afterward, Albert played the video footage of his daughter again, intending to make Laval feel even more guilty and finally reveal everything. A few hours later, when Albert and Sayoko are relaxing, Laval suddenly mentions Albert's past, which seems familiar to him. As it turned out, Albert had worked at the foundation, albeit only for a very short time, and had long since passed. As Sayoko continued to press him, Albert finally confessed that he had worked at the foundation, albeit only for a very short time. Albert explained that he used to work as a journalist, and he worked there only to investigate rumors that the foundation was involved in kidnapping and trafficking children. Laval also suggested that Albert might have obtained confidential information about the foundation, so the foundation felt threatened. Laval indicated that this could be the reason why they acted decisively by kidnapping Albert's daughter and killing her as a form of example so that no one else would dare to investigate or reveal their illegal practices. After that, Laval remembered someone who might be the main suspect they were looking for, Guerin, the foundation's former manager known for his solitude and living in the countryside. According to Laval, Guerin was the most appropriate suspect in the case, as he was directly connected to the foundation's operations and was most likely involved in the crimes committed. Before leaving to find Guerin, Sayoko expressed her disappointment with Albert. She felt betrayed because Albert had not been honest about his past working at the foundation. Sayoko thinks that the two of them have agreed to work together to avenge the death of their respective children, and honesty is very important for both of them in carrying out this plan. Long story short, Sayoko and Albert had arrived in the countryside where Guerin lived. They quietly entered his house, which happened to have the door open. Shortly thereafter, Guerin arrived with his friend, who had just returned from hunting, and immediately entered the house without suspicion. Without beating around the bush, Sayoko and Albert immediately questioned Guerin about the secrets of the crimes he had committed. However, just as Guerin was about to open his mouth, his friend returned home to retrieve the wallet he had left behind. Seeing the opportunity, Guerin immediately took advantage of the situation to turn things around. Using a stun gun, Sayoko and Albert managed to paralyze Guerin's hunter friend, while Garen himself chose not to fight back and willingly gave himself up.
J'ai compris. Range ton truc là.
Now, Garen is bound in chains with Laval, his former employee. Albert played back the videotape of his daughter. Garen, who felt he was innocent, continued evading him with an honest expression that didn't seem contrived. Until now, Laval and Garen had shown no signs of wanting to cooperate or reveal anything. However, Albert began to melt, hesitating to continue his revenge mission, as if he began to doubt the truth of the accusations against them. Sayoko, who remains focused on her mission, recognizes Albert's hesitation. Sayoko asks Albert not to be deceived by the words of the two of them, as it could be a trick to get them released. That night, the situation was not much different. Like Laval, Garen, who needed to defecate, cried out for help to be allowed to go to the toilet for a while. However, as per Sayoko's orders not to take the two of them's words, Albert remained silent, allowing Garen to defecate in his pants. The next day, after bathing the two of them, Sayoko and Albert again discussed whether or not they would continue this mission. Unlike Albert, who was starting to feel tired and worried, Sayoko, as a mother who lost her beloved child, remained steadfast and focused on her revenge mission. After leaving the empty building, Sayoko immediately went to work as a psychiatrist at a hospital. There, Sayoko is known to have a regular patient who has been suffering from depression for years. The patient is also of Japanese descent. Sayoko seemed attentive to the man, showing deep concern for his condition. When she returned home, Sayoko received calls from her ex-husband, who lived in Japan, almost daily. Sayoko and her husband's relationship was not going well after their child's departure. Although her ex-husband's calls were always picked up, Sayoko never once showed her face or spoke directly to her ex-husband, as if shying away from more personal communication. The following day, while Albert was still fast asleep on the sofa in another room, Sayoko secretly arrived early to meet Laval and Garen. We don't know what exactly Sayoko was planning, but she admitted that she was tired of Albert wanting to continue this endless revenge mission. To end all this, Sayoko made a deal with Laval and Garen. She offered to provide the name of a false suspect, another person who would be used as a sacrifice, to replace the two of them as they are now. Wanting to be free, Laval and Garen, of course, immediately agreed to the deal. After a few minutes of thinking and remembering a suitable person, Laval finally remembered the head of security who had worked at the foundation. His name was Christian. Known as a pervert, Christian seemed like a suitable person to become a suspect and take the place of the two of them. Not long after that, Albert woke up. As agreed, Laval and Garen revealed to Albert that Christian was the person they should accuse of being the mastermind of their daughter's death. They convince Albert that they can end this revenge mission and get freedom by accusing Christian. After Albert believed the story, Sayoko made good on her promise to release them both. However, what was surprising was that Sayoko only released the chains binding Laval and Garen's hands and then gave them a gun. Sayoko gave them a choice. They had to choose which deserved death. Garen was forced to shoot Laval to survive. As Albert carried Garen to the car to be driven to the Foundation's warehouse, Sayoko began to show unusual signs. She stabs Laval's body multiple times with a cold look on her face and a hint of satisfaction. Seeing this, the audience must have started to wonder about Sayoko. Is she a psychopath who pretends to be innocent, or does she purely want to avenge her? I don't know, this is only a tentative assumption, but there is a growing tension about Sayoko's intentions and personality. Escorted by Garen, Sayoko and Albert arrive at the Foundation's warehouse, where the former employees' files are kept. There, they finally find what they're looking for, the photo and identity of Christian, the head of security. However, while checking further, Albert accidentally found a cabinet full of glass jars containing human body parts. This finding further strengthened their suspicion that Garen and the Foundation he used to lead were involved in gruesome illegal acts. Seeing this evidence, Albert was even more convinced they were on the right track. Not long after, Albert decided to end Garen's journey. Coldly, he finished Garen off and put him in the car's trunk. Now, all they had to do was find out where Christian was to end this revenge mission truly. Coincidentally, Christian, the former head of security, was at the gym. Albert and Sayoko immediately went into action. When Christian was in the break room, the two of them made their move. Since Christian was the former head of security, Albert and Sayoko had difficulty taking him down. However, thanks to their solid cooperation, they finally defeated Christian. After that, they arrived at the building and immediately tied Christian up. Despite some resistance, Sayoko managed to immobilize Christian. Afterward, Sayoko advised Albert to be warier of Christian because even though he was bound, Christian could still be a threat if given the opportunity. Seeing Laval and Garen's bodies still inside the building, Albert felt a little sick and couldn't believe that he had come this far in contrast to Sayoko, who seemed very strong and calm without showing the slightest sign of remorse for what they had done. After finishing work and preparing to return home, Sayoko was entirely surprised by the appearance of Albert waiting for her outside. Albert admitted that he was uncomfortable alone in the building, especially with Laval and Garen's bodies just sitting there. Therefore, he decided to go out and carry the unconscious Christian in the trunk of the car. Since they were already out, Albert and Sayoko decided to sit at a cafe and talk about what they would do when this was all over. Sayoko admitted that she hadn't thought about it yet, while Albert said he wanted to visit Japan at least once to see what Sayoko's hometown was like there. After finishing their conversation and preparing to return to the car, Albert suddenly panicked and ran when he saw a police officer standing near their car, right next to the trunk. Unlike Albert, Sayoko remained as calm as ever. Confidently, she approached the policeman, who wanted to give them a ticket for parking their car carelessly. That night, Sayoko finally had a video call with her ex-husband, and she showed her face for the first time. Meanwhile, Albert is seen in the building, busy pulling out various tools that he seems to be preparing to torture Christian. The following day, when Sayoko arrives, Albert reveals his intention to make Christian suffer by cutting off one of his fingers. However, as before, Albert didn't dare to do so. He eventually chose to leave, canceling his plan. While Albert was in another room, Sayoko returned to her devious plan. She secretly agreed with Christian, just as with Laval and Garen. Sayoko ordered Christian to pretend his name was not Christian so that Albert would later think they had caught the wrong person. Not only that, Sayoko also asked Christian to give another name instead of himself. In return, Sayoko promised to free Christian from this tense situation. After Christian agreed to Sayoko's plan, he began to execute his scenario when Albert returned. In a cautious tone, Christian reveals that his name is not Christian. He argues that he's only saying it now because he was too panicked and couldn't think clearly. Slowly believing the confession, Albert listened seriously as Christian mentioned Deborah. Christian explained that Deborah founded the foundation and claimed she was the mastermind behind all the crimes. When Albert heard that name, his expression changed drastically. Fear radiated from his face, as he knew Deborah was dangerous and almost impossible to touch due to her power and influence. Meanwhile, Sayoko remained calm, paying close attention to every detail as she planned her next move. After Sayoko persuaded Albert to stay focused on their goal, Albert finally revealed another secret. He admitted that his ex-wife had worked alongside Deborah, even becoming one of her confidants. Albert already knew many things about the Foundation's secrets, as there was no way his ex-wife could have been appointed as the Foundation's manager without Albert's knowledge. However, Sayoko did not want Albert to give up and stop all the plans they had carried out so far. With great conviction, she continued to convince Albert to stay focused on their goal and not get too wrapped up in excessive worry. For her, this mission of revenge was too important to stop halfway. Escorted by Christian, Albert and Sayoko finally arrived at a children's park ride that now functioned as the Foundation's secret headquarters. Sayoko calls Christian by his real name, whether by accident or on purpose. Spontaneously, Christian responded to the call, making Albert immediately realize Christian's lie. Without the slightest hesitation, Albert immediately shot him on the spot. Located in a disused factory situated right behind the ride, it was the new headquarters of the Foundation led by Deborah. With his guts already formed and without the slightest fear, Albert did not hesitate to open fire and managed to finish off all of Deborah's men. After successfully taking out all of Deborah's men, Albert was surprised by the presence of Laura, his ex-wife, who was with the little kidnap victims. From here, it is revealed that Deborah, the Foundation's founder, has passed away, and Laura has replaced her position. At this moment, another secret is revealed. In the past, Albert, who was busy with his profession as a journalist, had abandoned their daughter. Desperate, Laura was forced to bring their daughter to the Foundation. However, As the chronology goes, Deborah became interested in their daughter and made her one of the victims of organ trafficking. Not only that, Laura also blamed Albert for being indirectly involved in this crime. Back then, when Albert was still working at the foundation, he played an important role as a marketing officer in charge of finding customers who needed organs. Albert was forced to kill his ex-wife to prevent her from continuing to speak at length, which made him feel even more guilty. However, Sayoko, who was behind them, overheard the conversation. Knowing this, Sayoko immediately acted and managed to paralyze Albert. Sayoko immediately took Albert to the warehouse, where she kept the 3 previous suspects. As it turned out, Sayoko knew Albert was involved in this crime. She deliberately pretended to invite Albert to take revenge, even though her real goal was to make it easier for her to reveal who was involved in the crime. The reason Sayoko looks cold, rigid, and always focused on her goals is not because she is a psychopath but because she is filled with anger and resentment as a mother who lost her beloved daughter. We don't know what Sayoko will do next to Albert, but she leaves him alone while playing a video recording of Albert's daughter's surgery. After leaving Albert alone, Sayoko returns home. There, she is seen on a video call with her ex-husband. Sayoko tells him that her revenge mission is almost complete. She then mentions that her next target is her ex-husband, as he caused her daughter to enter the foundation. The movie comes to an end.